just want to thank those of you for being here. We're really excited about our webinar today. It's the second to last in the series of webinars that we're having with our PCORI grant deliverables. So we're excited, especially for this topic today. The road to treatment, preparing the NM community for clinical trials. Just some housekeeping stuff. Again, thank you for everyone for being here. We're really excited about today's webinar. We do have closed captioning available. The webinar will be recorded and be shared on open platforms, so please be aware of that as you're communicating. Keep yourself muted if possible, unless we kind of call upon you for now, and then we'll try to have a little Q&A at the end. We will be monitoring the chat, but we'll try and gather at different points where we have little rest cycles to kind of check the chat. Okay. Yeah, the agenda today. Again, thank you everybody for being here. We're certainly a welcome. We have 3 guest speakers that we're super excited to have with us. We have Jill Castle, who's actually prepared a recorded video. We have Rachel Alvarez, who we've been working closely with for years through CureCMD and the CMDIR, and Rob Sunris, who's also involved in CureCMD as well. They're all going to tell us a little bit about their journey and their journey in trying to get to effective treatment. So we'll really, again, excited to hear their different stories. Then we'll have a Q&A, and then we'll talk about what the next steps are as far as like what the next webinar will be and what foundation building strengths next steps will be as far as an update maybe in our natural history work. Yeah, so this series of webinars was really meant to and created in order to connect the community to the researchers. In the prior webinars, we've actually had researchers in attendance. We've tried to listen to be able to provide a voice to our community to connect the community attendees that are willing to share their story. And today, I think you're going to hear a deeper dive into what those stories entail, hearing it from our 3 different speakers today. We'd really love and encourage all of you to take some action on the new resources. We have a new website, still the same URL, buildingstrength.org. It's been a complete redesign. Big thanks to Jen Tozer and our digital support team for coming up with a lot of the design features. There are new additional resources, new family kit, which you'll see on the next slide, as well as some of the research that we're funding currently, even a calendar of upcoming events. So we encourage you to visit it often and check in. This is our sample resource kit. What we hope is that it gives you a little bit of background and explains what the opportunity is for the community to connect, both to our care guides, the NM awareness cards, sign up for our newsletters, join us on different social media platforms, learn about local gatherings and such. And we hope to be able to connect you to other resources in addition to these as well. And here's a little sample of our NM awareness card. This is something you could give to practitioners. You could share with like community events and things like that. So if you're in need of some of these resources, we can provide them. And here's an example of a community spotlight. And this is Ellery Kinane, who has been a member of our community for some time. The whole family's been quite engaged with AFBS, and we're really proud to spotlight Ellery today. This is part of the storytelling that we talked about, where we're able to kind of highlight somebody, talk about what her current struggles are, and how she's going through that with different therapies and whatnot, what her nutritional support mechanisms are, a little bit about her daily life and her joys and things like that. So we're really happy to spotlight her. We look forward to spotlighting people in the future, and we'll have an opportunity for anyone on this call who would like to be spotlighted in the community to do that later in this call. Okay, so I'd really love to say just a bit about Jill Castle. from what I've gleaned from all the folks on this call, as well as listening to her video, unfortunately she could not attend. She had there's a medical issue that arose, but she's provided this recording. It's a little on the long side, so we ask you to be a little bit patient. We're anticipating to gain insights from Jill, guide us through a journey of clinical trials, using her invaluable firsthand experiences. This is the next step towards treatment. So from her very first involvement in DMD, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, the clinical trial, witnessing the FDA approval of the groundbreaking gene therapy. So next, I think we have a little picture of their family next. There's Anthony and Jill, mom. And then I think the next slide is to show her video. So we'll roll it, and please be patient. This is being recorded for future use, but at the same time, it is a very meaningful message. Please hang on.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jill Castle. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of your webinar today. I'm so sorry I can't be there in person. I have a caregiving responsibility, which I'm sure many of you can relate, that ended up interfering with our time slot. I want to say that I have enjoyed getting to know all about your community and your disorder, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my involvement in our community, which is a bit different. However, with most rare disease, I have noticed that there are definitely more similarities than there are differences. I think with most of us, we can relate to a lot of things that are common threads between our stories. Today, I'm going to talk about my story a little bit. When I had my first son, and then I had my second son 2 years later. When my first son, his name's Anthony, was developing a little bit slow. He was walking late and he wasn't talking a lot. We went in and got testing for autism because some of the traits he was exhibiting behaviorally, lining up his Matchbox cars and not being able to alternate his feet on steps, gave us an indication that there was maybe some delayed gross motor, and then the speech delay was a sign of potential autism. In that autism clinic, one of the physical therapists saw him get up off the floor in a way that is now known as Gower's maneuver. That's where our boys get up and kind of turn into a tripod and use their legs to climb up their body to stand. So a few days later, we got called in to the neurologist's office expecting just a autism disorder diagnosis, and we were told that our son had Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Duchenne is a progressive muscle disorder. They told us that he would, at this time he was 3 years old, and they told us that he would probably stop walking between 6 and 8, and he would go into a wheelchair full time, and then he would continue to lose more function, and he would most likely his heart and lungs would be affected, and we would lose him somewhere between 12 and 20 years old. They also told me that he was developmentally delayed, and that we shouldn't worry about school, that he wasn't going to be able to learn or ever read, and that we should really, given all the information, just go home and love him because there was nothing we could do. I'm sure many of you out there can relate that that's not something you tell a mother. So that wasn't information I was comfortable with receiving. Therefore, I started on a quest. I reached out and I found Pat Furlong from Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy. She quickly educated on me on what we did have available. Now, this was 21 years ago. So back then there was nothing. They weren't even talking about just simple interventions at that point. There were no clinical trials. There was no information. So that began my journey, and I started to turn over every stone possible to try to figure out some answers. I joined with Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy and some other parents, and we started down that road. I had learned through the grapevine that there was a scientist named Lee Sweeney that was working on a drug for the point mutations. And that was a very rare instance. So it was only a small percentage of our boys that would be able to look at this clinical trial. So, of course, I got on a plane and I tracked down Lee Sweeney and had conversations with him and showed him our genetic results and continued to follow up on that. And when they picked the clinical sites, I found that Utah was one of them, which was close to where I was at that time. By this time, I was in Arizona. And so I started tracking the IRB, which is the board of the University of Utah that makes the decisions and gets all the paperwork handed in so that they can become a clinical trial site. I drove them crazy. I drove them insane. So we ended up, with all of that, my son Anthony was patient number 1 in the first clinical trial for Duchenne, for a drug called Adalurin. And this was back again when they had nothing. So it was very exciting. I really didn't know what to expect. It was very difficult. He had over 4 biopsies. There were 5 stops and starts to the trial, just given the nature of how the FDA works, and how the data works. And we did over 53 visits to Utah. Back when the clinical trial started, they weren't even paying for flights. So I had to track down Angel Flights, which was a nonprofit that flew me and my son there to get all of these visits done. It was scary. We didn't know what was going to happen. Even if it did produce dystrophin, we've never had any boys with Duchenne that had produced dystrophin, so we didn't know what that was going to look like in their body. And during this time, he's not eligible for any other trials or treatments. So I was afraid of that, making that decision as well. He quickly had results. We saw results right away, and we had a lot of hope. He had more energy. He stopped falling down as much. He spoke faster. By this point, we had done a lot of intervention for his speech. We were doing PT, OT, speech, behavioral interventions for the autism piece, all kinds of educational interventions. Our life had quickly changed and gotten very, very crazy. And then we were traveling and doing all these clinical trial visits. And it paid off. We were told he would stop walking between 6 and 8. Anthony stayed on his feet until he was 14 years old. He did go into a chair, but it was delayed. So the theory back then was the longer we could keep him up on his feet, the less interventions he would need, and the longer that lifespan would be extended. And if we were able to extend all this timeline, we were able to wait for new treatments. We had a tough road with that first trial because, we had to come up with measurement. We had to come up with how we were going to measure these boys. We came up with a 6-minute walk test, which meant we were going to record how far they could go in six minutes. That was the standard that we began to use. Some of our boys that had behavioral challenges and were on the spectrum, which turns out is potentially a third of our boys with Duchenne, are on varying degrees of the spectrum. So, when you say walk as fast as you can, that means something different. And for some of our sons, that meant something different every time. So there were lots of challenges about capturing that data. They had trouble with the data because this was the first time we were using the 6-minute walk test. They were setting the precedents. They were also setting the criteria that we were supposed to meet for the FDA. We didn't quite meet that criteria, but there was quite a bit of efficacy shown. So, and nobody had ever done this before. So they had to stop the trial several times. We had to repackage the data. We did an FDA AdCom where all of us parents who were finding an impact with this drug went and spoke before the FDA to see if they would go ahead and bypass some of the issues with the data and go ahead and approve the drug. Fast forward, 18 years later, we still don't have that drug approved. So we are still fighting to get that drug approved. PTC Pharma, which was the company that we worked with, has not given up on the community, and they've continued to fight for that drug. I don't have any regrets, even though that drug didn't turn out the way that we had hoped. My son is just turned 24 the other day. He is in a wheelchair. He's losing the ability to use his arms. His skeletal muscle is definitely declining, but his heart and lungs look really, really good, which is not common, not super common in a 24-year-old with Duchenne. I do believe that it was that clinical trial that preserved his heart and lung function, and that's why he's doing so well, although that's just anecdotal. That there's no science that backed that up, because all we captured data on was the skeletal muscle, rather than just, we didn't have enough tools and resources to capture the data on the heart and lungs. So I have no proof that that's what is keeping him doing so well. But since then, we have so many drugs in the pipeline. We have all kinds of treatments in the pipeline. And I don't know if you guys have heard, but we have been approved with our first gene therapy approval. We also have several exon skipping therapies that have been approved since. I currently work with Little Hercules Foundation. I still work with Parent Project as well as a consultant. I'm getting ready to come on full-time with Little Hercules Foundation, and that is a foundation that works with access. Because what happened was our community was so focused on getting these drugs in treatment, and nobody really spent a lot of time thinking about how the payers were going to pay for it, how expensive these drugs were, the cost of the drugs, and how we were going to get them covered by Medicaid. A lot of our boys are on Medicaid waivers, and as a primary for some and a secondary for many others. And so we're trying to get the payers to understand the value of these treatments, trying to get parents to understand how to navigate that, trying to get pharma companies to put up these hubs that will help parents navigate these treatments. So I am still completely embroiled in this advocacy piece. We go to Washington, D.C. pretty often. We try to leverage funds, get support with our community. Our Duchenne community, I think the reason why I was asked to speak today was because our Duchenne community is a really great example of what parents have done by being aggressive. Now, I have mixed feelings about how much of my life I made this cause, because I do have another son and I do have my own life that I neglected for many, many years. I don't recommend that. I recommend some balance if there's a way to find some. But I do believe very strongly that the parents are the ones that are going to get it done. The parents or the families or the individuals that are affected. Now it's our young men that are going on to advocate because, they're living long enough to do that for themselves. That is by far the most effective approach there is families and the people affected. They're the most that have to lose in this game, and they're the most to have to gain. And I just really felt strongly that I couldn't expect other people to fight our fight. That if I wanted to make a difference, we were going to have to roll our sleeves up and get in there ourselves. So I learned everything I could, and I got in there and did it. I don't have any regrets, because although those treatments aren't necessarily helping my son, they're going to help a lot of families to come. Even when the treatments are struggling to be approved, there's other treatments that it paves the way for. Developing the 6-minute walk test and all that PTC Pharmaceuticals learned about the journey that we went on with Adelern impacted all the other treatments that have come ever since. And we would not have the hope and the treatments and the funding and the support and the momentum that we have now if we had not done that early on, no matter what the result was. I don't regret any of the decisions I made in that advocacy piece. And if there's anything, once again, I can share with anybody and help anybody who's coming after us to make it a little bit easier, to make it a little bit more tolerable, I'm always happy to do so. So once again, thank you so much for having me, and feel free to reach out anytime. I would love to hear your story and hear about what this journey is like for you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for listening in on Jill's selfless journey in caring for her son. And so great at the end there to hear that her son is having, joyful moments and joyful life, which is amazing. Thank you again for listening. I think it does tell you of the journey that is necessary, that if the patients and the families didn't get involved and engaged, they wouldn't be at the step that they are. Although it has had its own hurdles built in, there is still hope that there will be a treatment in the near future. And I think that's a nice segue into our next speaker, who I've had the good fortune of knowing for probably, Rachel, more than 10 years. She was the lead organizer for CureCMD's 2022 externally led patient-focused drug development with the FDA, which included the creation of the film The Tenacity of Hope. We'll see a few excerpts of that film today as an example of how a muscle disease community can share their voices and the impact that it can have on this process. Rachel, thank you so much for being here. I know we just saw each other at the CZI gathering this past week. I'd love to hear your story, and I again appreciate all the efforts that you do for your community and ours.
And I think I met you 14 years ago.
My gray hair is showing. Yours is not.
Bottles are useful. Anyway, hi, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. I have been a friend to the Nemaline community for quite a while. Your journey is very similar to the journey that many of the people in my community take. And we have, for any of you who have been to one of our shared conferences, I think that you've seen that shared journey and that shared experience. And I hope that has been useful. I really love that AFBS is featuring members of the community through the Community Spotlight. It's really just the beginning of how the Nemaline community can elevate your voices and experiences in a meaningful way to influence the direction of research, care optimization, accessing the same kind of everyday life things that those without a neuromuscular condition get access to, like college, relationships, owning a home, having a career, and all of that eventually being an integral part of regulatory decision-making when treatments being developed are ready for clinical trials. And something else important to note, I think, is the perspective of the parent or the caregiver or the sibling is likely very different than that of the affected individual. And I think ensuring that there is really a place for both in this journey, sharing those voices, sharing those experiences is really important in the development of treatments and also in the regulatory side of things. So I think you guys are going to share a clip of the film that we made last year. It really was designed around our patient-focused drug development meeting last summer. And when I was thinking about the format for this meeting, it was really, I really shied away from the standard format, right? Like there's one guy in the space that everybody hires, and there's this, standardized agenda that everybody goes through. And I thought, how boring, right? How am I going to make my community stand out and be remembered by members of the FDA when we come to them for regulatory decisions? And so we decided this film was the way to kind of make this whole thing memorable. So I was really pushing hard to not be weepy in this film. I don't know if you guys have heard the term inspiration porn. I'm very much opposed to it. I think all of us don't need to be pitied. I don't think we need to be, people don't need to be sad for us. But at the same time, we need to elevate our voices and elevate our experience to make sure that people understand that we do need support and we do need, advocacy to get us to treatments. So there's a fine line between being weepy and inspiration porn and being inspirational and motivating people within and outside of our community to really take notice and really step up and help us on this journey that we're all sharing, right? We're all sharing, trying to improve our quality of life and identify treatments. So,
Rachel, would you like us to show the clip now?
sure.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
We are at a significant crossroads right now of research, the FDA becoming aware and spending more time on rare disease, of being able to tell the story of CMD, of already having our first 2 clinical trials, of having natural history data. And so this opportunity to talk with the FDA and to make our voices heard and make this community a part of this process of patient-focused drug development is indescribable to me. We all have a role to play. You all have a role to play. And as much as you may believe that you're just one voice of many and how could I possibly make a difference, I assure you, you can. And your personal experience with this disease, with this journey, is critical to researchers to make sure that they're keying in on the things that matter most to you, that impact your day-to-day quality of life, on regulators. When a treatment comes across their desk and they need to make a decision, yay or nay, your input really needs to influence those decisions. And so, I hope that all of you will stand up and tell your story and volunteer for the community spotlight that AFBS is doing. I think it's really important and your voice matters.
Thanks, Rachel. And thanks for being the champion that you've been, not only for CureCMD, but supporting and assisting us with family conferences, the international registry, and all the work that you're doing.
My pleasure.
Our next speaker is Rob Sunris. He's the president of CureCMD. And he's the father of a first-year college student who's living on campus. He has a form of congenital muscle disease. Rob participated in the CMD's 2022 externally led patient-focused drug development meeting with the FDA as well. He was also in helping the making of the film, The Tenacity of Hope. So here to share his experiences, Rob. And Rob, really appreciate you being here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the invite. And I was just pinging Rachel. I said, I hate following her. She's such a good speaker and presenter. I have to come along and, try and clean things up here. First off, again, thanks for, bringing me on board. My name's Rob Sunris, from Charlotte, North Carolina, president of CureCMD. Even though we all know Rachel's the boss, most of you have met her. So, we're really proud of the outcome of the Tenacity of Hope film. A lot of work went into that. I got a chance to participate in it for a little bit. And, it was a great experience as we went through it. But, it all seems big. And what I want to do is kind of share on some of the stuff you do on a more local day-to-day basis is just a stepping stone to get to that level of, kind of sharing your story, et cetera. As Marc said, I have an 18-year-old daughter, Kiara. She has college in 6, uses a power chair full-time, a BiPAP at night, mobility issues, needs full transfer throughout the day, assistance with most of her daily activities. For those of you that met her, she's a very independent-minded girl, though. I think everybody can agree with that. And just by chance, living in Charlotte, Stacy Cassette and Lucinda only live about an hour away. So we've gotten a chance to know them and, more familiar with the Nemaline Myopathy group as well. Both Cinda and my daughter are students at the University of UNC Charlotte. here in town. So it's kind of cool to see them going on with their lives and, expanding. Following the previous experiences or previous discussions, I just kind of reiterating the importance for the families and the rare disease community to kind of share your stories with foundations and potential researchers about what it's really like to walk in your shoes. Researchers and people and foundations, whoever it is, they can read articles, they can, look at statistics, and they might understand the science, but they really don't have a true understanding of what you have to go through on a day-to-day basis within your household. So take these opportunities like we're talking about now to be able to kind of advocate and share your story and let other people understand, what this is, how this really impacts you, because that will be the leap that will stick with them to help kind of push for those types of, treatments, cures, research, et cetera, down the way. Just a quick example of that, and I'll take it back to the local level of how sharing that story or how at least other people being able to live in your shoes helps. And I'll use Kiera as she was going through her school system here in Charlotte, through middle school and high school. Power wheelchair user. The schools were great helping us work through everything. Schools were less than 10 years old, right? So they were ADA compliant. They met the minimums that they needed to have. So everybody thought it was good until they actually started to follow Kiera around and understand, well, how does she need to navigate the school? Where does she have to go? And all of a sudden, you're starting to hear these different types of discoveries with the staff. And again, the staff were great, but you'd hear, oh, wow, she really has a long way to go to get to the next, ramp within cutouts around the school. Or, boy, we only have one elevator. What do we do if it breaks? How do we handle that? And she's on the wrong floor. She can't even, she's loved theater and, couldn't access the stage from behind the scenes like everybody else. There was a kind of a ramp that led to it from the front, but it's different than appearing behind the curtain, right? So it's those aha moments that stuck with everybody when you actually get to see it and live it. And, within a few months, all of a sudden there were some changes. There were new sidewalk cutouts on the grounds. They commissioned to the district, and you see these little cutouts popping up all over the place, making it easier to navigate. They started shuffling her classes, trying to keep her on the main floor as much as possible so we didn't have to use the elevator. Not that it wasn't working, right? But just mitigating the risk of, well, what happens if it goes down? And the high school even installed a lift behind stage to be able to make life easier for her. So, great, adaptation, but that wouldn't have happened if we didn't have those continued conversations and Kiera was kind of sharing with everybody what she was doing. The interesting thing about all that, I think a lot of us know, right? Who benefits when they actually make changes that are accessible is it benefits everyone. We knew the maintenance team and the coaches at school, they were happy because now all of a sudden they had easier paths to take out, equipment and do maintenance around by having the cutouts. There's kind of those silly things that happened. The theater department was happier because now they had a lift to bring heavier stuff up onto the stage instead of the way they used to have to do it. So just a side benefit, and you can convince people that this will help more than just you and your family. So again, that's just kind of wrapping it up. That's the same concept that we were talking about within the film. It's letting people see what your lives are like and sharing that story because it'll reap a lot of benefits down the road. So that's really what I wanted to cover with everybody. So happy to take questions as we go on here, Mark.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks a lot. And I'll just put it out there. There is a Q&A window down at the bottom of your screen. If you want to start loading questions, please feel free to go ahead and do that. We won't be able to respond via chat. We can see some of the chats that the audience is putting through to the host and the panelists. And we'll be able to report back, verbally to you all. And any follow-up we need to do, we can do follow-up by email to the registered folks for the meeting as well. The next video that we have for you is actually a quick story from Jennifer McInerney, who shares her FDA listening event itself.
Hi, can you hear me? My name is Jen McNary, and I have 2 young adult sons living with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and I have no relevant financial relationships to disclose. As many know, and I won't spend a lot of time, Duchenne is a fatal muscle wasting disease that begins to show up in symptoms in early toddlerhood and ends in death from teen to early adulthood. Along the way, it takes away the ability to walk, lift arms, and eventually to breathe on their own, among other symptoms. My son Max has been incredibly lucky to be at the right time and age and place since he was a young toddler. His older brother, just 3 years older, has not been as lucky. I've had the privilege to have a front row seat to watch the science in Duchenne literally evolve and improve since February of 2002, when my two sons were diagnosed, when we were told there was no hope and to take them home and love them, they were going to die. Max has been part of making that history. I've come to know that the way that we battle Duchenne is with early access to innovative therapies. Access to Deflazacort at 2 years old, imported from Canada, but now approved in the US. Access to Exondys 51 via a clinical trial at age 9, but now approved in 2016. And last summer, access to gene therapy through a small clinical trial that included non-ambulatory patients. Because Max had access to steroids to reduce inflammation, he was eligible and still walking when exon skipping came along. Exon skipping then slowed the progression greatly and kept him walking until he was 17 and a half, which is unheard of. And it kept his lung function stabilized. So he was one of the oldest patients able to participate in a gene therapy dosing at age 20. Today, at almost 21, Max is stable. In fact, at 21, he is able to get in and out of his own bed. He will be ordering groceries online today and opening his apartment door while I'm across the country to bring them in and put them away. He'll be making all of his meals alone and feeding himself. He'll be letting his dog outside to play. And for him, the benefit of gene therapy is more independence at an age that is incredibly important to him. Max is stable in his disease progression because he had early access to cutting edge of science and his body still had muscle to preserve. It didn't matter that he had lost the ability to walk when he got gene therapy. He's still making use of his upper body strength and of course his breathing as well. Unfortunately, Austin continues to be just a few years and a little bit of muscle loss too late for clinical trials, and he'll again be waiting for approval for access. When it comes to gene therapy in Duchenne, being the mother of an older and more advanced patient, our tolerance for risk is incredibly high. I know what's happening without intervention because I see it every day in our community. These young men pass away at alarming rates. My expectations are realistic. I believe that having access to gene therapy early, before muscle loss, produces a much higher benefit, of course, as with any intervention. But I also believe as long as there is muscle to preserve, there is value in doing so. I would really appreciate any dialogue that the agency wants to have with our community and with the others here today to better understand our perspectives, our tolerance for risk, and our appreciation for early approvals, even in gene therapies. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And as we covered in the beginning or opening of this webinar, talked about sharing our own personal stories and the impact that they can have. And I think we've heard some really significant details and stories about how it's impacted decision making by both administration and the FDA, as well as drug companies, to have the support of the community. So consider sharing your story. We will help you along the way. We've got a template with pretty simple questions. We can even walk you through it and help with some design features as well. We will be doing this on a pretty regular basis going forward. So we hope as many of you in the audience today will get involved. We look forward to learning more about you. So for any questions and answers, we'd love to provide some feedback. Anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask these powerful speakers today? Definitely have them in attendance. So we'd like to try and make best advantage of it. While we process this a little bit, I'll ask Rob or Rachel maybe to chime in a little bit on, if there's one thing you could have done differently, is there something that delayed some of the process that you would like to sort of take away and advance? You could have advanced a bit further. I'm sure there's maybe 100, but.
There are 100. I unfortunately didn't think about this kind of notion of creating a film until 3 months before the meeting, which was put us really on a tight schedule. One of our subtypes is missing from the film. That's the first and foremost big problem. We actually showed a second of the film to include them, and really kind of showing a little bit more about how far we've come in terms of research and taking that patient voice. I'll tell you a quick story. We hosted a series of subtype meetings in 2017 that included researchers, clinicians, and affected families, a small group of affected families. And there were many researchers in that group that had never met an affected individual for whom their entire career was based. And that was so bizarre to me. So I had a young man in our community get up in front of them and talk about his journey. And he talked about not remembering how to walk and not caring. And that was not a priority to him. Not even minding being on sip and puff daytime breathing support. Like he had figured all that out. It was useful to him. He had much more energy. But the thing that mattered most to him was his joint contractures. He was going to be a writer. He was a senior in college, and his ability to type on his keyboard is fully impacted by how difficult and tight his joint contractures are going to be. And this was an astonishing thing to some of the researchers in the room. They're like, I thought my job was to find a cure for him. Now all this kid wants me to do is figure out what's wrong with his contractures and address those. Like, that was a total aha moment for us, that the voice of the affected community and the caregivers was like gold, right? Like, this is how we have based every single thing since that moment. And really just making sure that everything that happens around our operations is what the affected community wants. And that doesn't have to be the same thing, right? Like, you all are different humans. You all have a different experience. You all have you're a different place on the spectrum. But like, having that heterogeneous group of voices really brings together a collective need and rises to the top the things that most impact people. So, having more time to do that would have been lovely, but I still think that we met most of our goals. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't have anything to add beyond what Rachel covered.
Awesome. Thanks. You guys work too often together. Sharing your own thoughts. There was a question by Jamie Stanley, and I see that Stacy's written up a little response. Stacy, do you want to go ahead and answer it live?
Sure. Yeah, Jamie just asked if there was a genetic treatment available yet for Nemaline myopathy. And unfortunately, the answer is no. And that's part of the reason why we are learning all that we can from these other communities who do have approved treatments. They are the trailblazers. They've already done it. They've made it happen. They're seeing real results in their family members who have gone through these treatments, either in clinical trials or as an FDA or approved in another country type of treatment. So yes, that's where we want to be.
Yeah, and Gus, do you mind sharing what some of the clinical work or preclinical work is being done currently?
Yes, we are doing a lot of thanks to all the community support. We are giving grants for the preclinical preparation of future clinical trials. So many of our researchers are working on potential gene therapies of different type of approaches, because gene therapy is the general name, but then you have specific tools. And so you have a CRISPR, or you have oligonucleotide antisense, you have tRNAs, or different type of tools that can be used to correct the gene. And so many of the researchers that have grants from the Foundation Building Strength are working on that. They are working at Nationwide Children's Hospital. We have a group working in Australia, in Denmark, and all around the world. Wherever we have the chance, in Canada, Jim Dowling is using CRISPR, and is also trying to work with the mini genes, something similar to what is approved now for Duchenne, that is the mini dystrophin. It's a small version of the whole protein because the protein is too big. The same happens for us with Nemaline, for example, Nev, that the whole version to give us a gene therapy treatment is too big, but they are trying to make a small version of the gene that could work. So yeah, we are very actively moving forward with these preclinical stages.
Thanks, Gus and Stacy. There's a lot of work being done. Really proud of the work that we're funding. The researchers are really engaged. Gus is, in fact, and Stacy too, Sarah too, going to World Muscle Society in a week here, right? And so they'll be able to interact directly in person with a lot of our researchers, and a lot of the strongest muscle researchers in the world will be there, exchanging ideas, sharing, and I'm really happy to say that this group has really been very, very active in sharing. No one's kind of keeping secrets to themselves. So we're really happy about the progress that's being made. So when something is made in DMD, it's also those techniques are shared, pretty rapidly and quickly. And we feel like we've got the right researchers and some money in place right now to keep us ready for when the actual techniques start to kind of take hold.
Yeah, and researchers and pharma companies, they are taking the voice of the patient seriously lately. It didn't happen much some time ago, but now it is important. That's why the objective of this webinar to encourage you to share your stories, to learn how to share your stories, because the FDA regulators, and the same is happening in Europe with the regulatory bodies there, they want to listen to the voice of the patient.
Another question, is there a timeline or aim for when clinical trials for NM may start? I'll take a step back from that, Anthony, but thank you for your question. We are just starting our natural history work. And so the natural history study is one of those elements that will help define the clinical endpoints, or basically the scientific measurements that we need to have for Nemaline in order to start a trial. So the FDA wouldn't go about beginning to approve something until that work is likely done. That data collection on that is likely a 2 to 3 year period with a pretty rapid turnaround in publication after that. So we hope that the science and our funding, as well as some of the pharma companies, are willing to kind of step up, and in that 3 year period that we're able to kind of at least take something that's been preclinical and start to enter it into the clinical trial process. Rachel or Rob, any other insight or input given where we are today and what you all know? And don't hesitate to say you don't have to speed enough on where Nemaline is, but is there any other journey steps that we feel like we need to be taking and get prepared for?
I mean, natural history is huge. That was pivotal for us. We've had one clinical trial with an intervention that actually didn't make it to a phase 2 because the company dropped off the face of the earth, which is going to happen. But yeah, natural history data is pivotal, and the idea here is that in ultra rare conditions, you don't want to be able to be required to give half of your clinical trial participants placebo, right? Like that's unethical to me, right? Families who need this drug incredibly. So natural history data can actually be used as a control arm if done correctly. And I think you guys are going all about it really well. And a note about pharma, like 90%, 95% of rare diseases do not have a treatment. And it takes somewhere between $25 and $150 million to get to clinical trials. And even then, only 5% are successful. There's a lot of garbage that goes on the finance side of things with pharma. And they're getting more interested in rare disease. They're figuring out how to make this a financial model that is worth it to them. But the likelihood that you're going to have several failures before you get a win, I mean, that's an awful thing to say and to realize. But I think realistic hope is what's important here, and being really clear and transparent that, our shot, we have such a narrow shot to get this right. And we're likely going to fail a couple of times. But if everybody stays engaged and everybody's involved, I mean, I think it's we can accelerate it that much faster. And learning from other diseases like Duchenne. I mean, Duchenne has been at this since 1960. Okay, and they're still just now getting to a treatment. I don't think it's going to take any of us nearly as long, but realizing how long it's taken them, maybe put things in perspective.
And I would just
Yeah,
like to
it's just a collective.
I would just like to add that there is a methodology present in clinical trials that helps with this ethical dilemma of giving some of the patients a placebo. And how it works is that you have two cohorts at the start of the clinical trial. One cohort is given the treatment drug, the other cohort is given the placebo. And then after a set period of time, however many weeks that is, they flip-flop. And then the individuals who got the placebo initially get the treatment drug, and the individuals who got the treatment drug then get the placebo. So it's a way to have a control built in and still allow everybody to have access to the treatment drug, which is fantastic.
Yes, making clinical trials more affordable for rare diseases is something that is really increasing at the moment. The researchers and regulators, clinicians are working on design better or realistic clinical trials for rare diseases where you don't find a great number of patients to make like a classical clinical trial. We have to improve and be creative to do the clinical trials in rare diseases. There is a lot of work, thankfully, on that, as the example that Stacy mentioned.
Yeah, Anthony asked another question about the best way to contribute natural history collection. We're located in Australia. I mean, certainly getting connected to the international registry is a first step. It allows us to fortify our numbers to show pharma companies that we actually have more people represented than they may have thought. So that's a really big step. Second step is using the ICD-10 code that was named a couple of years ago. So a few years ago, Nemaline actually received its own ICD-10 code. So it's a medical code that then allows a de-identified find or search through claims data. So they can actually find where the Nemaline patients live and actually contact the physician providers to be able to alert people to actually trials that are going on. So that's a second way to do it, is to make sure that your doctor uses that code when you go to clinic. And then thirdly, telling your story here. Being international doesn't prohibit us from sharing your story. We can certainly share the story, with the FDA, even if it is an international dilemma. Currently, the natural history study data collection is only being hosted in North America. Europe is doing their own trial as their own collection of data as well, which is getting started right around the same time. It's being hosted by a physician there named Laurent Servet. In Australia, I don't believe there's any current physical testing being done, which would be beneficial to the folks in Australia. We can't get you to go to the clinic and get measured right now the way our current IRB is set up. But again, staying active, informing your physicians of your current state, any changes in that state. Anything else that I missed? Rob, Rachel, Stacy, Gus, how else can someone in Australia get involved?
No, one thing I want to say is that Australia or any other country will get the benefit of the natural history study, because of course there could be very little differences depending on the environment of customers, but the measurements are very objective. So a Nemaline myopathy patient in Canada will follow more or less the same path as the one in Australia. So the data, the results for the natural history study will be usable by other countries.
And if you, I'm not sure who can all see the chat, but you can Google ICD-10 Nemaline myopathy, and it should come up. The code is actually G71.21. And that should, again, register you within the claims community as having Nemaline myopathy, which does help because now there are mechanisms to actually find, hey, where do Nemaline folks live? And should we concentrate services and target therapies in those areas and in those cities in the future?
That's huge. We don't have any ICD codes in our community, and having that is actually, if you get correctly diagnosed, is massive in terms of being able to track. So congratulations on that.
Thanks for that, Rachel. Yeah, so next steps is, really what can the community do to actually support the process of getting to a treatment? Our resources, our new resources like the website we mentioned, the NM new kit, the awareness cards are all set up so you can share what's going on with you and get connected to the foundation a bit more. We ask you to each share your stories by completing a questionnaire that if you express some interest, we can get to you. Sign up for the newsletter to get future information about sharing your voice with policymakers. And then save the date for the next webinar, which is going to be on November 11th of this year at 8 a.m. Pacific and 11 a.m. Eastern. We really appreciate some of the international folks for queuing in today. I know we had Australia represented as well as Sweden represented, so thank you. And for everyone else around the country, and for those of you that watch it on recording, really appreciate you tuning in. If there's any other questions, just make sure. Again, a final thank you to our speakers, to Rob and Rachel for your selfless efforts in trying to support your community and what it does as an extension for ours as well. Really appreciate all the work that you're doing.
Yeah. Happy to participate. Thank you, Marc.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Rachel. And thanks to this team also for, setting up everything, creating the slides, Sarah, Jen, Stacy, Gus, Lynn, Kate, everyone for being on the team. It's been really amazing process. So really thank you, everybody. And I see the little thank you notes coming in for everyone that attended. So really, again, appreciate everyone's time tonight. Have a great night, and we'll talk to everybody hopefully soon.
Thank you, Marc. Thank you, everybody.